the real Lancashire accent, the heavy pronunciation on the letter U and R.
Okay.
Burnley.
As I've explained elsewhere, we can divide all these varieties of English into the Northwestern, which are rhotic, that is, they essentially still pronounce all the historic R's that we can see in writing, and the Southeastern, which are non-rhotic, and today only pronounce an R if it's pre-vocalic, that's directly before a vowel sound. So far, but far off. It used to be the case that all English speakers were rhotic. The loss of R's that didn't come right before a vowel sound happened over a long period in England. But we can locate it roughly in history by observing, albeit simplistically, that America was colonised early enough to be rhotic, while Australia and New Zealand were colonised late enough to be non-rhotic. Now, that didn't mean that the old country had become completely non-rhotic. This 1962 map, based on the famous Survey of English Dialects, shows in red the parts of England that were still rhotic then, in the speech of older rural men. But now compare that with this more contemporary map, where the faint yellowy patches show where rhoticity hangs on for some of the local population. So there are still rhotic speakers in England, just as there are still non-rhotic speakers in the US, though their numbers decline as the standard dialects become ever more dominant. I'm fascinated by exceptional and transitional rhoticity. So in this video, I'll look at surviving but declining rhoticity in England, and in another video I want to look at the sporadic emergence of some new rhoticity in Australia and New Zealand. Nowadays, the region of England most associated with rhoticity is the West Country, which means the southwest. In fiction, this is the location of Treasure Island's Admiral Benbow and the Pirates of Penzance, hence the tradition that pirates be rhotic. But when we look closer at this map, we can see that the brightest spot of gold is this treasure island of rhoticity in a northwestern sea of non-rhoticity. This is Lancashire to the north of Manchester. According to John Wells's Accents of English over 40 years ago, rhoticity could be found over quite a bit of this area, but clearly we have to look a bit harder for it today. Researching a topic like this involves not just reading articles and tracking down historic audio samples, but of course watching loads of videos. A really helpful thing is being able to skip ahead to the next video in a playlist like this at the click of a button, which is just one of the ways my work is made easier by the Opera browser, today's sponsor. The video skip button appears whenever I hover at the top and immediately takes me to the end of whatever I'm watching. And yes, it even skips ads. Right next to the video skip button you see this video pop-out button, which lets me detach and move the video anywhere in the browser or outside it. Very handy when I have several resources on the go at one time, and even more so when Opera has split screen. Just drag one tab down and the screen splits into two. You can plop the tab down on the left or the right. Comparing data's easy, no need for multiple browser windows. Now, you know when you have lots of tabs open and can't remember which one you were just looking at? It used to drive me crazy, but Opera has tab traces, these subtle underscores. The lighter the underscore, the more recently I visited that tab. That's in dark mode because this is Aurora theme, but Opera has a whole gallery of themes. If we choose, say, Viking with light mode, see how the tab traces are now dark. You can customize themes in all kinds of ways. In Viking, I can make the sunrise or bring up the northern lights. Try all these features now by downloading Opera completely free, of course, through my link in the description. Rhotic Lancashire speech may be unfamiliar to many of my international viewers, but British TV audiences have been acquainted with it thanks to various mostly comedic characters.
The police phoned.
Oh yeah?
They've released your mother. Damn. Good though, ain't it? Because they haven't had a record out for years.
That's me, we're doing you a favour. Could be dodgy stuff, corned beef, especially from the Argies. Probably put all sorts in it.
Though in the second clip, that wasn't the actor's own accent.
Thank you very much for this.
Despite growing up in the Northwest, I never had much direct exposure to Lancashire rhoticity. But a few months ago I was passing near the area and I took the opportunity of Market Day in picturesque Clitheroe in the Ribble Valley to go in search of some real local speakers who wouldn't mind appearing in a YouTube video. And huge thanks to all of them for their time and for giving their permission. In the limited time I had, it wasn't hard to find rhoticity in older men.
The real Lancashire accent, the heavy pronunciation on the letter U and R.
Okay.
Well, the Farkas Arms has been voted the best restaurant.
I'm surprised how pleasant the actual surroundings are and how pleasant the people are.
Accrington's sort of halfway.
I don't think they can afford it in Clitheroe.
Does it get congested?
Not anymore, no.
They've got money over. They don't spend it this year.
We've been saying on this market for 35 years.
But the two young women I interviewed were totally non-rhotic. Note incidentally that aside from the rhoticity, their Lancashire accents are all pretty much the same.
This market's on a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday.
Not very far at all in the car.
We've got the car park there, that's always fun.
We do dog walking training and behaviour.
It's like a little village store.
Trying to work on being able to socialise with other dogs.
Now, it's classically the case that older males have more conservative speech patterns and younger females are more likely to be in the vanguard of change. But of course, this wasn't a scientifically designed sample, and these differences in rhoticity can be attributed to regional factors. My two young females were from nearby Burnley and Worley, while my most consistently rhotic Clitheroe speaker turned out to be originally from Blackburn.
I'm born in Blackburn. Born in Blackburn.
The go-to person on the phonetics of Lancashire rhoticity is Danielle Turton of Lancaster University. I really recommend this very thorough paper and a talk she gave on the topic linked in the description. So what region is the most stable for rhoticity in Lancashire?
I would say Blackburn from what I can tell. I think speakers are extremely stable, and not only do the vast majority produce some kind of rhoticity in their casual speech, also in word list style, their rhoticity gets stronger. So it gets stronger in terms of the phonetic, the acoustic measure we would use, but it also gets more frequent. And I think that's surprising for lots of us that study English sociolinguistics, because we hear time and time again that rhoticity is stigmatized. So for me, that's a conflation of two different things, which we usually get away with in sociolinguistics. So the conflation of prestige speech and hyper speech. And for Blackburn speakers, being rhotic is hyper speech. It's what they do when they're paying attention to the way they talk.
Do you have any thoughts on why Blackburn would be stable?
Usually I compare Blackburn and Preston because they're very similar sizes. They're about 150,000 people. But compared to somewhere like Preston that's got the train going through from London to Edinburgh and Glasgow, Blackburn doesn't have the same kind of links. So that's one way of thinking about it. But the other is also that Blackburn's a really self-sufficient town. I think it's got one of the highest manufacturing rates in the country. A lot of people, if you look at the census, about a really large proportion of people travel, let's say, less than 3 miles for work. It's got the types of hospitals and amenities that you might associate with a bigger place. So you don't really have to leave.
Now, as you were listening to my rhotic speakers, you may have noticed some features that are different from what you'd expect in the more familiar general American type of rhoticity. For one thing, even with more rhotic Lancashire speakers, some phonetic environments are very often not rhotic at all, like the weak letter vowel in the middle of a word, such as Saturday and yesterday, and in weak function words.
Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Saturday.
Like any other kind of retail, they've been hit by the internet and supermarkets. Internet.
Within a year or two, there'll be no gap between us and Wally.
You can get this kind of thing in America. I remember the city of San Bernardino, California, where only the stressed R is pronounced, but I think it's more common in Lancashire, and I found it in an old recording of a rhotic Lancashire speaker from the Survey of English Dialects made in the 1950s.
But, I never twigged it. I said it were April Fool Day yesterday. Yesterday.
But even in stressed syllables, all of my rhotic Clitheroe speakers had some non-rhoticity.
Northerners are more warm and friendly.
On market days, on that car park. Car park.
This may be somewhat determined by phonetic context, but it could also be somewhat lexical, that is, dependent on the individual word. This gentleman was consistently non-rhotic in the word market.
Market development, the progress of the market.
But here are rhotic and non-rhotic pronunciations of a single word.
If you went even further, if you get further east, further east.
Another thing that distinguishes Lancashire rhoticity from the typical North American kind is its sound quality, namely its generally clear resonance. Many of you will be familiar with the idea of clear and dark L, but the English approximant R can also be relatively clear or dark. The Lancashire R is typically clear and contrasts strongly with its L, which is dark. I'll try to demonstrate clear and dark L and R with some pronunciations that can be heard in different regional varieties of English. Now, I'm not claiming that all speakers in these regions sound like this, nor that R and L sound like this in all contexts. But I think these, or something like these, are possibilities at least. In North America, you can hear dark L and dark R, call work. In Ireland, you can hear clear L and dark R, call work. In Lancashire, we hear the opposite, dark L and clear R, call work. And I think in some Caribbean varieties, like in rhotic Guyana, you can hear clear L and clear R, call work. Call work, call work, call work, call work.
I said it were April Fool Day yesterday. I said it were April Fool Day yesterday.
In order to articulate a relatively clear R, the bunched body of the tongue will typically be shifted a bit further forward in the mouth. Darker R sounds could involve a relatively back tongue body and/or constriction of the throat or pharynx. Acoustically, a clear R has higher frequency resonances or formants than you get with darker kinds of R. Here are spectrograms of the syllable R, pronounced by Clitheroe males and by several North Americans.
R, 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 R,
R,
R, R,
R,
R,
R, R,
R,
R, R, R.
The most often mentioned acoustic feature of English R is a drop in the third form at F3, but we also see a rise in F2. And note how the convergence of these two formants is visibly higher in Lancashire than in these American tokens. The final token, by the way, is a great example of a classic very dark American R, where the throat constriction or pharyngalization is audible right from the start of the vowel.
R, 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 R.
Now, of course, North Americans don't all sound the same, and there are American accents with a relatively clear R. Some New Yorkers have this. If you don't want to see Donald Trump, look away now.
The freest, greatest, and most noble republic ever to exist on the face of the earth. The earth. People are very concerned.
Here are general American and Lancashire examples of nurse words.
Earth,
Earth,
Earth. Third, Earth,
Earth,
third,
third, Earth,
Earth, third.
And here are Donald Trump's examples. A side effect of the clear front New York R was that some New Yorkers pronounced words like nurse, firm and learn not with R coloration or with the kind of long monophthong that I have, but diphthongally with a front closing glide. It's the pronunciation famously, but not quite accurately, depicted in phrases like toity-toid.
The song I wrote, and it's published by my own firm. I'll guarantee you're going to win if you line this. Line.
Which brings us to the issue of rhoticity loss, de-rhoticization. Typically, this involves not the simple dropping or vaporization of a R consonant, but its vocalization, that is, its transformation into a non-rhotic vocoid, a vowel or glide. The New York vocalization that we've just seen created a closing glide, but we're probably more familiar with R vocalization that either prolongs the preceding vowel, like car becoming car, or a movement to a more central vowel, like more becoming more. Now, as far as I'm aware, you don't get the old New York-style closing glides in Lancashire, but what you do get in Lancashire brings us to what I think is the most interesting thing in the whole topic, namely the continuum between rhoticity and non-rhoticity, and the frequent difficulty of deciding whether a sound is rhotic or not. Time and again, when listening to Lancashire data, I decided on a first pass that a given word was pronounced with an R sound. But when I zoomed in and listened to the supposedly rhotic portion on its own, all I could hear was some variety of schwa. Here, with permission, is one of Danielle's speakers.
I love the new Thor book. I love the new Thor book. I love the new Thor book. A book. A book. A book.
So how do you decide whether some speech sample is rhotic? By acoustics? By articulation, if you have some way of measuring it? By ear? If by listening, then by reference to what? With vowels, we have Daniel Jones's cardinals as some kind of reference points for comparison, but we don't have cardinal R. I think the kind of schwa off-glide is key. We're all familiar with centering diphthongs. British dictionaries are stuffed with these three from old RP, though not many people pronounce them quite like that anymore.
As my air.
And you can hear a rather more open off-glide in London estuary.
I swear.
Now, nobody would ever call pronunciations like that rhotic, but as you make a central schwa-type vowel closer, with the tongue body higher, this brings F3 and F2 towards each other. Here are demonstrations of IPA vowels. And we saw before how F3 and F2 converged in rhotic tokens. Lip rounding can further reduce the formants in ways that resemble consonantal R sounds. Take a word like this. If I add a relatively open schwa to the end of the vowel, I don't think it sounds at all rhotic. More, more. But if I add a closer, rounded schwa, the result sounds to me a lot like a Lancashire pronunciation that I might well have initially described as rhotic. More, more, more. So, R or a vowel. Interestingly, back in 1899, Richard Lloyd described northern rhoticity in terms of what he called coronal vowels. Of course, my descriptions here have been mainly phonetic, rooted in physical description, but the possibility exists that something may not physically be what we think of as classically rhotic, but phonologically may be a realization, an allophone of a more abstract phoneme that we can consider to be a rhotic. Typically, the vocalization of standard German R, as in vier, is considered superficial and phonetic, an allophonic form of an underlying R phoneme, meaning that phonemically, German is still rhotic. Conversely, one of my favourite analyses of English R is in the pioneering Preliminaries to Speech Analysis by Roman Jakobson, Gunnar Fant and Maurice Halley, a supergroup if ever there was one, where R is treated as an allophone of schwa that you get before other vowels. And I should say that the amazing diversity of sounds across and within languages that can be described as kinds of R certainly deserves a video of its own. Now, Danielle Turton points out that some of her Lancashire speakers who seem to have schwa off-glides rather than strong R sounds still differentiate pairs of words like spar and spar, stellar and stellar.
One thing I want to be a bit more careful about differentiating is this intermediate stage where we might not hear a phonetic R in the coda, but speakers still will differentiate between minimal pairs by some kind of schwa off-glide or some kind of intermediate sound between a more consonantal R and a truly vocalized R,
which could be described as underlying rhoticity. Speaking of schwa or off-glides, another diagnostic that can be used for rhoticity versus non-rhoticity is so-called intrusive R. which I've discussed in a number of videos. In accents with this feature, r can be inserted after certain vowels to separate them from a following vowel, as in schwa off glide and vanilla rice. Now there's no reason to treat any differently the r in far off or killer instinct. It's the same inserted r in these accents, so far and killer have no final r either phonetically or phonemically, meaning the presence of so-called intrusive r is evidence of non-rhoticity. So when I went to market in Clitheroe, I took with me a list of potential intrusive R phrases.
Law and order, law and order.
Law and order, law and order.
Vanilla ice cream, vanilla ice cream.
Vanilla ice cream, vanilla ice cream.
Withdrawing cash, withdrawing cash.
Withdrawing cash, withdrawing cash.
China and Russia, China and Russia.
China and Russia, China and Russia.
And thank you again to my wonderful speakers in Clitheroe for agreeing to be in the video.